Okay, I'm here to do another episode of Reflections, and this time my guest is IWillDominate, plays for Curse. How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. I'm interested to get into this Reflections because we've wanted to do it for a while, but we haven't got it set up till now, but now the moment has arrived. So one of the interesting things about like early in your career is that you played in this Complexity team, which at the time, Complexity's always been a famous name in North American esports, and people now will know the team because they have a team. They've had a couple of teams in LCS. But when I say Complexity back then, that was when Complexity was nobody in League of Legends. Like the team they had then is only known after the fact. So at the time they had like DontMashMe, they had Patoy. And this is obviously how Patoy later got into Dignitas. If that team had famous players back then, then why wasn't that team already like a good team? Why wasn't it like higher up in the rankings, do you think?
Well, I think that the time that we had actually a solid lineup was extremely short. So for the first like 4 or 5 months, we just had random players coming in and out, just people that used to be on the team, and like for roster sake, we would just like keep people internally, and also because the team wasn't posting results, Complexity didn't necessarily want to like change many of the names because they didn't really see a reason to. In their minds, we were going to be placing like 5th through 8th, no matter what. So it didn't really matter what players were playing. So we only had like a month where we played with MashMe and Patoy, and even though we started getting better, we started being able to take games off top teams. Instead of getting just 0-2'd by like TSM, CLG every single time, we would go like 2-1. We would take a game, and then we'd just like throw. They'd beat us strategically in another game or something like that. So we were actually getting somewhere. Like the team was shaping up, but after I left, I guess the team just disbanded.
Because obviously, when you actually went to Dignitas and joined them, you were replacing Jatt, who now people just only know as a commentator, because it's so long ago that he was actually a pro player. When you came into the team, like how did you get the in to join Dignitas? Like what was did someone recommend you? Did you already know some of the players? How did you get in?
Well, I knew all the players just from like solo queue. I was pretty high up on the rankings, so I just was able to like play with them all the time. But I guess my real in was through Locust. I had played on a team previously with him called Haters Make Us Famous. And that was like a team that competed in the first WCG, like WCG 2010, way back when. It was like the first North American or like world championship or whatever. And yeah, I played with him on the team. We ended up placing 3rd on in that tournament. It was a bunch of random people on the team. I think Odd1 was on the team too, so it was like me, Odd1, and Locust, and just like a bunch of random people. And I kind of quit for like 10 months. I didn't really play until like June, and then once DreamHack happened, I kind of started playing competitively again. I'm like, wow, this game's actually going somewhere. I might as well like try to like get super high on the ladder again. Like that's when I joined Complexity and just tried to like start going pro, I guess. And once they had the opportunity, I talked to Locust some, got a tryout, and everything went well from there.
One of the first big tournaments for Dignitas, like the ones that people remember, will obviously be that World Championship, the IEM World Championship, where you guys made all the way to the final. And listen, at the time, people will forget teams like CLG were supposed to be better. People thought this team was going to, or maybe TSM even, because they'd done so well at previous events. What was Dignitas at that period? What was making you so good as a team, do you think?
It was really random. Like I think we just had really good champion pools. We were on top of the meta. And I guess we just played well on LAN. Like we just didn't have LAN jitters. We'd go out and we'd just play our best and just kind of like stomp people. And it was actually really weird because at that time we didn't practice at all. Like we literally could not practice because Voyboy was in high school and he was like in all AP classes and had an extremely hard workload. So we literally did not practice at all before like events. Like maybe we practiced something like 14 hours total between like Kiev and Hanover, which was like a month and a half. So I think we just had good champion pools, and we like talked about the game. We were one of the few teams that before the game would sit down and discuss what we wanted to play, like picks and bans, what type of strategies we would want to run, and we'd actually have like a plan going into the game. So I think that was like, I guess, our major strength.
People back then always used to talk about the jungler in the context of like, how does he work with the top laner? That was like a lot of the synergy back then. If Voyboy, this is when Voyboy, we remember him at his peak, was when he was like really strong at that tournament. What did Voyboy need in Dignitas from a jungler? What style worked best with him, do you think?
He just needed me to be like around there. Like I could either be messing with the other jungler or just be like ganking his lane, but any small advantage he would get, he'd be able to just like completely destroy the guy. Like he was one of the first people that understood freezing in the lane, and many top laners just didn't know what that was. So like if Voy got an advantage, he would freeze the lane in front of his turret, and you'd suddenly see like the CS lead go from like, oh, Void's up 10 CS to like, oh, now he's up like 50 CS. He has 100 CS, the other guy has 50, something like that. And most top laners just didn't know how to deal with it, and no one in that time like really knew how to like break the freeze, like call the jungler up, tell him to push the lane, reset the wave, and then like you can farm again. So pretty much like my goal going into games would be to like either neutralize the other jungler or get Voice slightly ahead, and I would rely on Scar to like, even if Scar died, he would always be farming, like he would stay in the game. And our bot lane was pretty much self-sufficient too, so it was mainly just like pressure the top side of the map in one way or another, either through wards or killing the other jungler or directly ganking his lane, something like that, and then he would just be able to snowball the lead from there.
Even though this tournament had so many upsides, getting to the final, beating like teams that, okay, people won't remember them now, but AAA were considered a strong team at the time, and people thought maybe they would make the final. So this is all very good, and you got to finish second. But unfortunately, when I interview someone from that particular final, I'm going to have to talk about counter jungling. And if you're on the other side of that, it doesn't look as good. So what can you tell me about this happened? Was like how much of it was stuff that sort of existed before but people hadn't done in games, or was this really like just a new innovation you hadn't seen, this style of counter jungling?
Well, counter jungling was something that was like normally specific to just the jungler, so I was prepared for maybe like one person walking up in my jungle, like being able to defensively ward, fight out that one person. That'd be like normal proceedings for me. What I wasn't expecting was like the amount of pressure that they put into counter jungling by using like multiple people. So if you remember that game, like obviously the first play of the game, in the first game of the finals, first play, I get CV'd at my red. I don't have any wards because we missed the ward spot. I don't have a flash because I'm playing Shyvana with exhaust, and Edward and Diamond both come to my red. They come from opposite sides, CV me, they see where I am, and they just like kill me as two. And that was something that we had never seen before. No one had ever like roamed their support into my jungle like level 3 and killed me. So that was just like a flaw in our strategy, I guess, that we just didn't ward the right side. Because we were so scared of their level 1 invade that we warded our blue buff instead of just warding like the red buff, knowing that if they do come to my blue buff, we'll have people there, we'll be able to like defend it. So we didn't really prepare for anything past level 1. And I guess that's like pretty much snowballed the whole game.
It's actually quite rare for pretty much any position in League that people will all just agree like this one guy was like the best, or he was the most interesting, or something really unique. So that's why when someone like Faker or Mad Life comes along, it's like you can tell that they're the best, you know, because if everyone agrees, it's like, okay, there's not even really debate there.
Yeah.
At least in the past, that's how people always talked about Diamondprox. Like from what you've seen of his play or play against him, is it accurate? Was it overblown at all ever? Do you think that he was that much ahead of the other junglers?
I definitely think he was like really good. He was probably one of the best, but I didn't think that he was like significantly better than someone like Saint at that time, or like other junglers I had played with from NA. I didn't think he was like significantly better than any of them, or like Linak. When I played against like Linak, I didn't think that like Linak was significantly worse in skill. I thought Diamond was really solid, but I just thought that their team was just way better than any other team we'd ever played against. Like they actually worked together at a time where competitive games were pretty much a solo queue. Everyone would just try to perform well in their roles, and then you just kind of like group up at like 30 minutes and just start like pushing down towers or like doing Baron and stuff like that. So yeah, I definitely thought that like their strength was like a good team, and the way I view jungle is like if your team's the best team in the world, you're always going to look good as a jungler. So
when that famous triple trade happened where Voyboy went from your team to CLG, and so then Saintvicious went from CLG to Curse, and then Crumbzz, that's the weird one. Crumbzz came as a jungler from Curse and became the top laner of Dignitas. What was the thinking behind that move? Why take a jungler and put him top lane? Like, wouldn't it have been, I mean, listen, it worked out, but wouldn't it have been better to just directly source someone who already played top lane?
At that time, like I don't really think it mattered, because if you look at where I came from, I was a top laner originally when I joined Dignitas. Like I played top for complexity, and I just was put into the jungle role at Dignitas. You pretty much at that time would just find the best player you could and just put him in whatever role you needed, and you just wanted there to be like some similarity between the roles. So top and jungle would be like, oh, you're both playing bruisers, it's pretty much interchangeable. You might need to like learn a little bit more about like jungle paths and like how to gank effectively and like ward control in the jungle, but like if you can play those styles of champions, you're good enough. So yeah, we thought Crumbzz was like a really good player. He played solo lanes in the past. He played mid at IPL 3, and we saw him there. So we knew that he was a solid player, and we just decided, that he was probably the best available player at that time, and I think he definitely was.
When I described like that IEM tournament is what people think of as Voyboy's peak as a player. After that was when he did this triple trade. He went to CLG, and the hype was incredible. People thought like, wow, well, if they already have star players and they've added Voyboy, like, you know, they're going to be the best for sure. The best periods of his career was playing with you as his jungler in Dignitas here, and then later on when he had Saint in Curse and they had like that good first split. If we look at the worst part of his career, it was the CLG period. Like all the pressure on him, and then Hotshot GG's his jungler. Was Hotshot GG actually doing an okay job in terms of Voyboy as a jungler? Was there some problem there, do you think, that they weren't on the right page or something?
Well, I just think that Hotshot's not the right type of jungler for Voy. Like, he would walk around with oracles, he'd clear wards, he'd play like the super support style jungles, but he never really knew how to gank effectively and get Voy ahead. And like, Voy's the type of player that if you get him ahead, he's going to carry the game. And Hotshot never really understood that. They kind of had like too many carries in one team, so like Hotshot would normally just kind of farm out vision control and then try to make like a power play bot for double lift, but he never really would snowball Voy, and he would oftentimes like try to snowball Voy, and it would end up having like the opposite effect. So like he would come top and they would lose a 2v2, and suddenly Voy's laning against somebody with double buffs, and yeah, that's pretty much just like an auto lose. And they just never really clicked. And personally, I just never thought Hotshot was meant to play jungle. I thought he was like a pretty good top laner, like he was decent at least, but at that time he was just like not cut out for jungle.
So this period while you were in Dig was one of the times when Dignitas always played CLG in fucking every tournament, like upper bracket, lower bracket, like always meeting each other. Yep. What were you like? Like, I know now you're like friendly with Saint because you've been in Curse for so long. At the time, he's known to be let's just say he can be a contentious guy sometimes, or maybe he likes to shit talk a bit. And listen, it can be in fun sometimes, but okay, he likes to shit talk a bit. Did you always get along with Saint? Did you have like a rivalry in that sense? What was it like in the game and out of the game?
I never like didn't get along with Saint. There was like a period in CLG where I just like didn't talk to him much. Like we would just like meet at tournaments and we'd play, and then maybe we'd like talk about a couple things like after it, some like jungle related stuff. But yeah, I never like was in a situation where I felt like he was being contentious with me. I always felt like we had a decent amount of mutual respect, and I never felt like pressured or I just never saw him as like the asshole that the community painted him out to be back then.
When that year happened and all the NA tournaments, people remember that TSM were pretty much winning them all. Even if they'd maybe lose a game to CLG, they did win the tournament somehow. If you had to look back now, what was that TSM team so good at? Like at the time, people would have probably naively just said, "Oh, they have the best players," like they have all the good players. But now you look now and you think to yourself, okay, so if people went down the roster, there's actually not that many of their players that would clear cut the absolute were the best at the role at the time. Some of them were like top 2 or 3, and it was debatable. What quality do you think they had, or was there something on it that was hard to overcome about their style of play?
Well, I definitely thought that they practiced the most. Like, they actually had a gaming house before anyone else. I know back then we wouldn't even practice. We would maybe practice like maybe 1 or 2 days in between LAN events. So that's like a month and a half where we're only practicing 1 or 2 days. And they would be practicing like every day together. Like, you'd see them playing like on EU, trying to get practice, playing versus like NA teams at night, EU teams during the day. So they were definitely like practicing more. And I definitely thought that like the intangible quality that they had was good shot calling. Like, at the time, Reginald actually knew how to shot call in game. Like, he would make decisive calls and people would listen to them. And all teams were kind of indecisive at that point. So just having one person that had a general idea of what to do and made decisive calls made that probably the best team in North America, or definitely the best team in North America during that period.
I realize, like, listen, you're from North America. You've only played Europeans at certain tournaments, so this might sound like a question that's open for you to be biased in. But okay, at that period of time, for most of 2012, we had this weird situation where TSM stayed at most of the NA tournaments and they won them all. And then in Europe, M5 just stayed in Europe mainly and won those tournaments. And aside from at the very beginning of the year, we never got to see those two teams meet. Like, everyone always wondered, what if M5 had come over to an IPL or something, or what if the others had gone over to a DreamHack or something? What would have happened if the two teams had met like at their peaks? What's your sense for it? Who would have won, do you think? Who would have got the upper hand?
M5 would have won, hands down. M5 would have just crushed them.
They were just a level above.
Yeah, they were just that good. They were like at that period, I consider them the best team in the world, like better than Koreans, better than the Chinese teams I had seen. I actually consider them the best team in the world. Up until Worlds, where they ended up like getting 4th or 3rd. Yeah, I definitely just thought that they were like one of the strongest teams. They played well together. They were always on top of strategies. They always knew like the up and coming things, and you just learn from them. You'd see what they were playing and then just copy it. Like even as a jungler, I would look at like the things that Diamond was playing, and I would see like the type of strats they would run with it, and from there I would just like copy it and then try to get Scar to play some like the similar champions. Like I would kind of observe their champion synergies and try to take it from there, because they just had a higher level of game understanding than any other team at that point, so that's what made them so good.
When you guys went over to Korea for the summer season of OGN, so it was only the second season they'd ever even had of OGN champions. Yep. You know, not a lot was known about Koreans. People maybe knew the ones who'd played on NA server, okay, so someone like Maknoon or Woong, etc. They were sort of known a bit. But no one could expect like how strong the scene could already be. And I've heard all these stories whenever I've interviewed people who went on these teams on Fnatic and Dignitas and CLG. The story always goes like this: like we got there and we thought, okay, you know, like let's get settled, but we're probably going to be decent to be. You know, well, actually they all thought they were going to be really good to begin with, all the NA players. Okay, so they get there and then supposedly, you know, in solo queue, they're like, holy shit, like this is really hard. It's like way harder. And then not only that, they go into the scrims, and in scrims they're suddenly losing to teams they've never even heard of. And was it really that crazy? Was it really that hard to get into it when you got over there?
Yeah, we got shit on, like absolutely shit on. There's no other way to put it. I remember like the first set of scrims we had, we scrimmed against Zenix Storm, and Zenix Storm wasn't even considered the best team in Korea. They're considered maybe like top 5 at the time, and we played against them. And I think they beat us 10 games in a row, just like straight up 10 games in a row. Maybe we won 1. I think we actually won the second one. So they stomped us 1 game, we stomped them the second game, and then we were playing Draven at that time, and no one else was playing it. They just banned Draven for the rest of our scrims and just shit on us like 9 more games in a row. And at that point, we started playing their B team. We're like, okay, these guys are too good. We'll play their B team. Like, we'll get some confidence back. We'll beat up on their B team. Then we'll come back strong. We'll play against them. So we played their B team. And then their B team was winning about 70-80% of the games versus us. So, yeah, that was also when we were pretty much a new team. Crumbzz had just joined, so we were relatively weak compared to where we were like a couple months from them. But yeah, I definitely think that they were on a different level at that point. It was definitely way stronger than anything we had experienced in NA.
So, listen, this is actually something that I can draw a parallel to StarCraft 2, because one of the reasons why so few Westerners went to Korea and really tried to like commit to playing in Korea in StarCraft, even though that's where the best players were, is actually because they would go there thinking to themselves, like, okay, the Koreans are going to be, well, in their case, they knew the Koreans were better, but even so, they think, okay, they'll be better, but like, I'll get used to it pretty quickly. And because they're all coming from the West, where they are the best players, they used to, even in practice, they know they're going to have 80% win rate, okay. Well, they would go and they'd play on the Korean ladder, and suddenly they'd have like 30% win rate. And so it's not just like you're losing a bit more, you're losing so much that now like you question everything. You're like frustrated and you're like, oh, like, is there even a way to get better? Like, is everything I'm doing wrong? Like, how did you stick with it? If you start off and you're losing to the B team of Zenix Storm, like, this sounds like such a bad scenario. How did you get through that?
Just kept on playing and just played a lot of solo queue, because the Korean solo queue ladder is actually really competitive, and they try really hard in solo queue, and they play pretty much the same style that they play in scrims. So we just played a bunch of solo queue. We all got really high up on the ladder. I think me, Crumbzz, Skara, and Cutie were all within top 50 by the time we left, and we just kept on grinding solo queue, and just our scrim results just started improving. Like, we were learning from these teams, even though they were better than us strategically. We still had mechanics to compete, and I would say like first, most of the teams we were a stronger mechanical team, which is like weird to say at the time that we were stronger like mechanically than Koreans. But once we were able to just like get through the early game and get through like the roam pressure and like how early they would do dragons and just like how they would vision control and stuff like that, we started being able to like actually win games. So I remember it was like a great day when we finally just like won a set of scrims against Zenix Storm. Like 2 weeks later, we finally like 2-1 them in a set of scrims, and we all like went out to eat. We were all proud of ourselves and stuff, and yeah, we just ended up turning things around, because like we knew that we could get to that level, but yeah, we just needed to adapt to like how they played over there.
The funny thing is, when everyone knows the story, okay, that Like basically none of the NA team or Western teams in general did well at those OGN tournaments except CLGEU, who made it all the way to the final. They were like the exception. Okay, it was taken for granted that everyone did badly. But what's funny is if you go back now and you look at the group that Dignitas got, it's not like you had an easy group. Right? You look at it and you're like, okay, Azubu, Frost, Najin, Saudi. Like, holy shit, that's like those are like the two of the top 3 teams in Korea in your group.
Yep.
You've described here, like, obviously it was hard initially anyway when you're in Korea. What kind of level were you at when the tournament actually came around, OGN? And like was it even viable that you could have beaten these teams?
Unlikely. Like we maybe would have like a 25% chance of winning either game. Like the one versus like Azubu or the one versus Najin Sword. Those teams were still like way better than us. They were better than the Korean teams we had been scrimming. So yeah, our group ended up being like absurdly hard, and coming into it, we didn't expect that. Most of the Korean players we talked to would speak of Najin Sword and like Azubu Frost. Like Azubu Frost was at its lowest point; they weren't good anymore. Like Loco Doco was like the hero of that team, and now he was off there. They have this new guy Shy. He's like not very good. That's like how they would talk about him. Okay. Woong's like washed up. Like that's literally how Korean pros would talk about those players. And yeah, that was very false, obviously. Shy was an extremely good player. Woong was not a bad, like, people call him a bad AD carry, and maybe he wasn't as strong as some other AD carries, but he was by no stretch like a bad player at that time. And yeah, Sword was just essentially like Mac Noon and a bunch of like ragtag players. Prey and Kane, like, who were those guys? Those guys are shit. That's what everyone like told us. And yeah, they were just beasts. Like, they were all just like really good players. And that's why they ended up going to Worlds. Like, both those teams ended up going to Worlds from Korea. So, yeah, those are like some of the best teams they had over there.
What's funny is, those are the 2 beast teams. And then the 4th team, like a little amateur team no one even knew. Yep. You might not even know this yourself unless you've looked on Leaguepedia, right? But this amateur team, ROMG, 2 of the players who played for that team, they obviously weren't good at the time, went under different aliases than they use now. Do you know who I'm talking about?
No, I want to hear this.
Acorn and Heart from Samsung
Blue
now
God.
were on that team. At the time, they were nobodies at the time. I'm saying, like,
that's crazy.
It's a really weird piece of trivia. When I looked it up, I was like, what? So obviously, this is like when you look at it now, it's like, how could you have got out of that group? You know, it's like really ridiculous to expect you to. Even so, after your experience in Korea, when you go back to NA, did it make you think, like, okay, here's the thing, because TSM didn't go to Korea, I've heard, even from some of their players, that right up until the Season 2 World Championship, they were sort of in denial. They were like, nah, I think the Koreans are just overrated. Like, you know, listen, if Dignitas lost to them, whatever. If CLG lost to them, you know, we won't lose to them. We're still the best. And so it seemed like the teams who went to Korea were like, nah, the Koreans are really good and they're going to get better and they're coming, and, you know, like, we've got to get good when we get back home, right? Was that the mentality? Did you fully accept, like, now the scene is better?
Yeah, I fully accepted that the scene as a whole was better, but I definitely thought that there were Western teams that could compete. Like, coming back, I still thought that Moscow 5 was going to win the World Championships. Like, after playing against all the Korean teams, I still thought Moscow 5 was better. And up until they lost, I thought that they were going to, like, take it all the way and ended up winning the tournament. And they actually ended up losing to TPA, so they didn't even lose to a Korean team. So, yeah, I was really excited to see them play a Korean team because I thought that they were the best team in the world still. But, yeah, as a whole, they were way stronger. Because even if, like, the top teams, like maybe CLG could compete with, like, CLG, Dignitas, and TSM would be, like, semi-competitive against the top 5 Korean teams. Like, the Korean teams are obviously better, but the top 3 teams in NA were able to, like, at least, like, be in the same game. Like, the games would not be decided as much as, like, if you took the top Korean team right now and put them versus the top NA team right now. I don't think the disparity was as big back then. But definitely, like, all the teams, like, 4th through, like, 12th in Korea were better than probably most of us, but then they were like so far ahead of the 4th through, like, 12th best teams in NA. Like, no one even knew who the 4th through 12th best teams in NA were at that point. Like, there was this new team Orbit coming around that eventually became Cloud9. You'd have, like, Monomaniac, which was like TD, GGU, like that same team was coming up at that time. You really didn't know who was good, like who was going to be the best, or who was going to be even top 8 in NA. And in Korea, like, the all those teams are extremely solid. Like, they played the game strategically well. Where in NA, you'd only have maybe 2 or 3 teams playing strategically well, and that's why you'd see CLG, Dignitas, TSM winning every single tournament. Like, getting to the top 3 of every single tournament would be those 3 teams, was because every other team would make such bad strategical mistakes that they would just end up throwing the game at some point, no matter how far ahead they would be able to get in like the early game.
When I did my interview with Cutie Pie, he made it sound like he didn't explicitly say that this is why Locust got removed, but he made it sound like like you could like add the facts up for yourself. So he told me, okay, when I was playing in Korea, you know, like I was getting shit on first when I played in solo queue. So then I started, you know, like really grinding, like putting in hours, and then I got finally, you know, I got to 2,000 elo. Like I did it. I was like good. And then he just told me like as like a throw in comment, like, and then I saw that Locust had played the same amount of hours, and then he was 1,300 elo. And so then people see that Locust exits the team right after that, and then in comes Patoy, who used to play with Dominate. Was this really like, when you went to Korea, is this where you just realized like, okay, we can't play with Locust anymore?
Yeah, he was definitely mechanically weaker. It wasn't as bad. Like Cutie Pie exaggerated that a little bit. Because number one, Cutie was the one that had the easiest job in solo queue. Like me, Scar, myself, and Crumbzz all put in maybe like 200, 300 games to get to like the top 20 in solo queue. We all put in that many games, and Cutie put in maybe 80 games. Like he wouldn't even play that much solo queue over there. He put in maybe 80 games over that same time frame, and he was maybe only like 20 spots below us on the ladder. So he was still extremely high up. So he actually like flew through solo queue. Like he was winning most of his games, and part of that's because like the AD carry role in solo queue is just good. If you're a solid AD carry in solo queue, you can just carry a lot of like the games that you can't carry from other positions. But another part of it was that Cutie was just like a ridiculously good player back then, and even though he was never extremely mechanically strong, he was really smart about the game, which is weird when you think about Cutie Pie being smart.
Sure.
But yeah, he was a smart player. He knew how to play the game well, and yeah, he definitely like breezed through solo queue. He had a lot easier time than like than Locust, obviously, Crumbzz, myself, Scara. We all had points where we'd get stuck on ELO brackets. Like, Crumbzz and I would be like, damn, it's so much harder to get from, like, 2K to 2100 ELO. And then we'd get, like, stuck at 2100 ELO. We'd maybe, like, lose 50 points. It's like, all right, so now we got to grind up to 2200. And then we'd finally get 2200. And it's like, wow, this is where it really starts getting hard. I'm playing against, like, the best players in Korea every game. And it was, like, hard for us to grind. But Cutie just breezed through it. He was a beast in solo queue at that point. And regarding Locust wasn't 1300 ELO. He put in maybe like half the games that he put in more games than Cutie, but maybe like half the games that myself, Scara, and Crumbzz put in, and he was like 1700 ELO. So he wasn't like topping the ladder or anything, but he wasn't 1300. He was he was just like, I guess, like middle of the pack, like plat level in Korea. So yeah, mechanically he was not able to compete with the Koreans at that point.
So then what was the reasoning to move him out of the team then?
We thought it was just two things. Like, obviously, him being so low on the solo queue ladder just means that his mechanical skill wasn't up to par. But besides for that, I guess it was like the dedication. The fact that he was putting in half the games of like the rest of us, besides for Cutie, who is just like a god, just like made us feel like he wasn't dedicated enough to really wanting to improve. Like, we'd scrim for like 8-9 hours, and then after scrimming for 9 hours, the rest of us would just jump into solo queue, with the exception of Cutie Pie, who would just do random stuff. Like, I don't even know what he would do. He would just like get on Skype with like a bunch of people and just like try to learn Japanese or something. Like, literally, he would just spend time doing the most random things you can ever think of. Yeah. Yeah. And Locust would just like go up to his room and read. So yeah, just we didn't feel like he wanted it as bad as the rest of us wanted it, and that's why we decided to remove him.
When I think of when Patoy came in the team, Patoy and Cutie Pie were I always thought they were like a really underrated duo. And we saw like when LCS first started, when they were in Dig, like they were actually like really good. And so I always thought, like, wow, when a synergy is really good, you know, oftentimes players, they like each other. Especially, you know, they have like something works in game even if they don't like each other. Like the communication just worked, and you know, we just instinctively knew what to do. But then I've heard these stories when I did interviews with both of them that are just fucking baffling from the outside about how Cutie Pie, again, he tells stories in a funny way, okay? But he makes it sound like he came home from Korea and then, you know, he just came into practice one day and he was about to join the server. And then they were like, hey, this guy's Patoy. He's like the support now. And he was like, okay. And they just started playing, and like he never even spoke to him. And they would never even talk to each other while they played. They would just like like
Yeah.
fucking telepathically communicate and just know what to do. Like, how could they be good if they didn't even like each other and talk to each other? Dominate.
They were just both like really good players, but they would talk to each other. They would communicate like the necessary stuff in lane. But yeah, just generally speaking, they just never liked each other as people. Like Patoy was the exact type of person that Cutie Pie just can't deal with. Like Cutie Pie can deal with like the loud, like super obnoxious type of person, or like somebody who just like is making stupid jokes all the time. But Patoy was just like kind of like whiny and like bitchy about things, like kind of like a girl, like some types of like ways, and Cutie just hated that. Like you just see like Cutie's blood boil over just listening to like Patoy just like whine about stuff, or just like make an excuse about like something, or like the way Patoy would answer something is he would be like, "Oh yeah, I just didn't do that because I didn't feel like it." And like Cutie would be like, "What does that mean? Like why didn't you just do the obvious play?" And like without getting a direct answer, Cutie just couldn't function. So they definitely communicated most of the time, but they just never got along like as friends, I guess.
In that year, there was the original storyline when you first made the switch and Voyboy left was like, okay, Dignitas, they always initially get the jump on CLG, they beat CLG, but then CLG, in theory, they're still considered like the best team along with TSM, so they always come back and they always beat Dignitas somehow and go to the finals. Yeah. But by the time the regionals came around, I'm sure CLG themselves thought that was going to be the storyline again. They were like, listen, we're going to the finals, we'll play TSM, and then, then we decide who the real best one. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, no, you lose to Dignitas now. Like, now Dignitas is the second best team by the finals of the regionals come around. Yep. What do you think? Like, give me both sides of it. How did Dignitas, when you lost like a star player in theory, Voyboy, how did you get back to being really good? In fact, maybe get even better? And then how did a team like CLG, who people thought were going to maybe be the best NA team at some point, why did they drop down, do you think?
Well, I think that it was two things. So when we lost Voy, we lost some of our mechanical skill. Like Crumbzz wasn't as good champion pool wise, or maybe like direct gameplay wise as Voy, but Crumbzz had like other strengths. Crumbzz was more involved in like team discussions and things like that. He was more willing to just play whatever like the team wanted. For example, with Voy, it was like, what do you want to play? And we'd be like, oh, we think Malphite's really good right now, or like we think like Shen is really good right now. And Voy's like, okay, well, I'm gonna play Fiddlesticks top and Akali, so fuck you guys. And he would go off and he'd like win his lane with that, but we never really knew how to like integrate that into a team comp. Where Crumbzz would be like, all right, so what's good? Okay, I'm just gonna practice like 100 games of Aurelia and 100 games of Malphite, and I'm just gonna play 100 games of Rum 1. I'm gonna play the champions that you guys want me to play, and I'm gonna try to perfect them and work them into a team comp. And Crumbz's communication was also really good. He would roam a lot more. He would try to make plays like across the map. He was more active with teleport and things like that at the time. So he just had different strengths. So it took us a while for us to integrate those characteristics into our gameplay and make them really positive. But it also just changed the way we had to play. Like, for example, as a jungler, if I have this like supportish style top laner who's able to help the team and wants to roam a lot and stuff like that, that means that I don't have to go up there as much, and I can play a more carry oriented style of jungle where I'm farming my jungle, and I would try to like affect other lanes. I would make plays mid and bot and try to just like do more like objective focus things instead of just concentrating on getting someone ahead and like getting like the beast we had to the point where he could carry the game. And another thing that people didn't really know about the way we used to play on Dignitas is that we would give Voy a lot of inherent advantages. Like, for example, we would give him buffs level 1. Like, for example, in IPL 4, we would, when he played Lulu, we'd give him a blue buff level 1. And that's why I played Mundo with that comp. It wasn't because this Mundo, Soraka, Lulu, COG comp was just this godlike comp that we had constructed. It was literally us sitting down. It's like, okay, well, Voy wants the blue buff. What junglers can you jungle with only getting one buff? And it's like, Mundo doesn't have mana, so I guess I'll play Mundo. So we'd set me behind to get Voy ahead. Where with Crumbzz, we would kind of just like let me play like the style I wanted to play, and I would just kind of try to snowball the game through making correct plays and maybe having Crumbzz make more team-oriented plays instead of just like solo-oriented, kill the lane, push the tower type of plays like that. So it was that, and it was also the fact that our planning just went to another level. Crumbzz was really active about bans and picks and like how we could manipulate those. in our favor. So we would spend even more time strategizing. So for example, against CLG before PAX, we would spend like 2-3 hours talking about the game, like every possible scenario, how we wanted to pick. We had like all these variations of, if they're running this style comp and we see them heading here, then that means that we're going to pick these type of champions. And if we see this other comp, that means that we're going to look for like a global strat. So we had a much better understanding of the macro game with Crumbzz. So we just weren't as mechanically strong, but it was also just us having better game understanding, I guess.
When it came to the Season 2 World Championship, I heard some fucking ludicrous story from one of the Dignitas players along the lines of like, yeah, well, what we did was we thought to ourselves, TSM's the best NA team. So we just only practiced TSM for like 2 weeks beforehand, and we just practiced back and forward.
100%
and, you know, we were beating TSM, so we were thinking like, listen, we're going to do awesome at this tournament. Like, listen, what I want you to kind of explain is like the context of that time. Because listen, it sounds really silly now, because nowadays people know you have to play a wide variety of teams. And if you play one team, you might just get adapted to only them. But listen, at the time, I'll admit, maybe that wasn't as widely known back then. Maybe it was like still being tested out. What was the theory behind playing TSM like that? And did it really seem like it was the best practice?
Because no teams were really good in NA. Like, who could we practice against in NA? CLG and CLG were pretty much only practicing against each other. They were both staying in the same gaming house at that point, and they were only practicing against each other. So even if we wanted to scrim them, they weren't willing to scrim us. Okay, so CLG was in our group. So we knew if we practiced against CLG, anything that we played against them would be known by CLG. So we just automatically thought, okay, we can't practice against CLG or CLG right now. Who else can we practice against? And in NA, all the other teams went on break. Like, they didn't have to play until relegations months down the line. So there was only 3 teams that actually were practicing at that point. It was TSM, us, and CLG. And since we can't practice against CLG, that means we have to practice against TSM.
Okay, so a question I have to ask you about now, because this is one of the most famous moments, believe it or not, in NA history, is this storyline about how, you know, like Dyrus accidentally said, you know, they were going to do this roaming support strategy or whatever it was, and obviously, listen, if that had been like a really key secret strategy, you can understand why you'd be annoyed at that and all the rest of it. But I sometimes feel like people have maybe gone too far with that. They made it sound like just that getting told made it impossible to get out of the group. Like, at that point, you were screwed and all your practice is 100% worthless, and you could have never gotten out of the group anyway. So, like, give me the reasonable approach. Like, how much did it affect the team, and how much was it a problem, and how much of the not getting out of the group was to do with something else?
Yeah. I would say that was by far the biggest factor of us not getting against groups. It was a cheese strategy meant to win like one game, which was our first game against CLGU. Our mentality was that we should be able to beat Saigon Jokers in a standard game, and that Najin Shield or Najin Sword at the time, if we beat CLGU, that means that we'll probably be able to advance out of the group anyway. So our whole practice was about beating CLGU and running the strat and catching them off guard and being able to just snowball the game before they really were able to like adapt to what was happening. So yeah, like when that was told, CLG completely countered our strat. If you watch that game, they dropped something like 7 wards level 1. They started their support mid, which was like completely unheard of. They had their Sunna laning with their Orianna because they knew that we were gonna like 3-man roam on mid. They had their Kog'Maw soloing bot because they knew that we were only gonna put one person bot. And it was just like they completely countered it, which is something that they were gonna need to adapt to in game. Like, I'm not sure if it would have worked 100% in game, but we definitely would have started with an advantage instead of starting with a disadvantage like we did in that game. And yeah, as soon as like we saw that in game, it put us on tilt for like the rest of the tournament. We were like, everyone on my team just went on full tilt because we knew that we had practiced so hard on something, and we'd seen how teams had adapted the first time they see it. Most teams were not able to grasp what was going on. It would take them a couple of games to like understand, like, okay, so what we need to do is put our support in a different lane. We don't need 2 bottom if it's only going to be like a Gragas soloing bottom. We need to just protect our lanes. We need to play super passive early. We can't go for any of the plays we normally go against. If they come to dive with 3 people, we're going to need to back off the turret. These were all decisions that you needed to be able to make on the fly, which pretty much no one at that time that we had played against was able to make. And even after scrimming TSM for multiple games, it took them a while to adapt. So them just knowing to just defensive ward and start their support in a different lane and have like the Maokai not run into his jungle where 2 people were waiting. Those were all things that ended up it just like pretty much screwed over our chances at Worlds. So I think that's why people made it such a big deal. And like at the time, I felt like it was actually underplayed how much that screwed us over in that tournament. Because none of us were told to say anything. Our manager Odie was like, all right, like I know this is bad, but like don't try to like bring too much negative publicity to TSM. But I honestly felt like that was like one of the roughest things like I've ever dealt with. I felt like our chance of Worlds was just like completely shot after that. And even though we did end up losing to like Saigon Jokers and Najin Sword, like our mentality was just completely destroyed by the time those games played. Like we couldn't beat anyone at that time. If we played like Curse or like Monomaniac or any of the teams from NA, we would have lost those matches with how badly we were thinking about the game and like how destroyed we were, because we knew how good Sword was. We knew we probably weren't going to even be able to beat Sword on our best day. So after losing to CLGU, knowing that we had to beat Saigon Jokers and Sword just seemed impossible to us, especially when they had already seen like our core strategy and how to counter it. So we essentially were just like, okay, so we have to play Sword in Standard, and we can't play Standard well. So yeah, that was pretty rough.
When I asked you earlier about the hypothetically putting M5 versus TSM at their peaks, and you said, listen, like you thought M5 would definitely win, that sets a good precedent, okay, because it shows that you're not just biased towards NA for no reason, and that you're not just going to say, oh, well, if TSM beat me, then I should say that they're the best. So I've got an interesting question for you. Since you practiced TSM so much leading up to that event, and you knew them so well as a team, one of the reasons why people have often kind of like made fun of them is the fact that like, you know, they've never beat a top Korean team. But at that event, they actually got the most unlucky possible bracket draw, because they were number 1 seed and they were automatically seeded through. But when they did like a draw for the seeds where one of the 5 couldn't go to the round of 8, obviously. And so it ended up that the one that didn't go to the round of 8 automatically was Frost, the best Korean team. And then they ended up playing, just because they're coming out of the group, they ended up having to play TSM in the first round, and that's how TSM loses. Obviously, Frost is an amazing team, but give me a realistic sense. Like, if TSM could have played one of the other teams who came out of the groups, so they could have played against CLGEU, or they could have played against Invictus Gaming, or they could have played against, what was the 4th one? Najin Sword. Those are the other teams that they could have played. Could they have beaten any of those teams, do you think?
I don't think they would have beat Sword. I don't think they would have beat IG. I think CLGU would have been close, but I think that at that time CLGU was extremely strong too. I thought Froggen was just like probably the best mid in the world at that tournament. So yeah, I definitely think that we're gonna have a hard time no matter what. I don't think it was just an unlucky draw. Just like the reason they lost. Because if you saw, like, I believe CLGU played a Zubu Frost, right? Semifinals.
Yeah.
At that point, yeah. So CLGU was able to like take a game off Frost. Like they were competing with Frost during those games, and yeah, TSM just pretty much got like shut out there. So yeah, I don't think it really mattered. Maybe IG, but I think that the Chinese style was still really random, and I don't think that TSM would have adapted well to that either, because it was kind of similar to like the Rome style that we had been doing and beating them with all the time in scrims, except it was just with different champions, and it was probably just like a little bit higher level than us too. So I think they're probably going to lose quarterfinals no matter what.
When this scenario happened, where at the end of the year you get this competitive ban, and at the time I don't think there was any set time limit all the time. It was like maybe it was going to be reviewed in a certain amount of time. So at the time, no one knows when will Dominate ever be back at the pro level again. Will we ever, like, will he rejoin Dignitas? Yeah, okay. So no one was sure what's going to happen there. If you think to yourself, like, where did you see, where was Dignitas as a team headed before the ban happened for you? Like, what hypothetically would the next year have been like if for some reason that didn't happen?
I definitely think Dignitas would have been stronger. Like, I think we would have. Every time you go through a roster changes, it hurts you unless you're forced or unless you want to replace a player because they're like underskilled. I think that like a roster change is just forced upon you can never really be a good thing. Like if somebody has like a family emergency or they get like traded or something like that, it always takes time to readapt. And at that time, I thought Dignitas was like an extremely strong team, at least in NA. I thought we were top 2. We proved it at PAX, and just like playing in like MLGs and stuff, I felt like we were getting stronger. And LCS was like a good format for us, so I definitely don't think that if I was playing, they would have ended up relegated that split and like end up like 5th, 6th. I definitely think we would still have been top 3 in NA easily. And I don't really know about how it would have gone in summer, but at least for the spring split, in the immediate future, I think they would have been top 3.
So how did you, like, why continue on in LoL at that point? Like, maybe become just a streamer or just chill for a while? Like, I mean, for example, one of the other players who got a ban with Linak, people won't remember him now, but he was a top jungler in Europe, and he just straight up pretty much quit. I think he like played a little bit, and then he was like, I'm done with this. Like, who knows what's going to happen in a whole year of your life, you know? Why keep going? What was the reason for Dominate to keep playing?
Part of it was just I had something to prove. Like, I didn't feel like I was done yet. Coincidentally, when I was banned was actually when I was at like my prime. I think that was my strongest point. Around like the winter of 2012. I just felt like the meta of junglers I was playing was a lot different than everyone else. If you just remember like the type of champions people were playing, it was like Maokai and Skarner and all these supportive style junglers, and I was playing like Hecarim and Rengar, these like bruisers. That was actually probably stronger at that point. So I thought I had like an advantage against most people in that respect, and I just knew that at the time I was a top 3 jungler in NA. So I knew that even after a year, I might not be top 3 anymore, because of just the competitive experience that you lose when you get banned and just like not playing on LAN and not playing on stage as much. But I knew that there was no way that I wouldn't be top 8. There's no way that I would not be LCS caliber after a year. So I knew if I wanted it, and I spent time grinding, and I kept on putting in the hours and practice like I was a professional player, and kind of like immersed myself in the atmosphere of a competitive team. Like, that was kind of why I joined the Curse House. I knew that there was pretty much no way that I wouldn't end up in the LCS. So for me, it was just the fact that I knew I was good enough, and that I just still felt like I had stuff left to prove in the game. So I just wanted to keep going.
Going to the amateur scene for that year, you were in this weird scenario where it actually puts you in an ideal spot for me to ask you about the rise of Meteos and Cloud9, because you were there around the period when you were playing these teams, and even though the hype came out about them around there, like, wow, they're really good, they're beating all these people, no one would really believe it until you actually get into LCS and you see them beat like the TSMs. Then you know it's legit, you know. Did Meteos really just come out of nowhere, and he was just some random guy playing Go for LOL and just on like 150 ping, and then one day suddenly he's just amazing out of nowhere?
No, I always thought he was good. Like, when I played against him, I always thought he was good. But I never really got to play with him, versus him once he was in LCS, when he became like the god jungler, or once it became the best team. So I don't really know, but I remember like thinking he was definitely a solid jungler. He would go for very like low risk, high reward plays, which involved like a lot of farming and things like that. But I was definitely not expecting them to be as good as they were, because we played them in the amateur scene, and there was like a IPL 6 qualifier that we ended up playing versus them, and it went to all 3 games, and this was about a month before the LCS qualifier, so this was right before LCS, and we played them in a best of 3, and we won the first game. The second game they ended up winning, and the third game we were up like 5k gold and inhibitor, and we should have been able to get Baron, and we ended up just throwing massively and losing. So at that time, I thought the Curse Academy was like pretty much just as strong as Cloud9. So I definitely didn't expect them to go into LCS and start crushing everyone. I thought maybe they'd be like 4th, 5th. I knew that they were better than the bottom teams, like they were going to be better than Velocity, things like that, but I definitely didn't think that they would be as good as they were. But yeah, I definitely always thought Meteos was like a good jungler. He was always solid, and I think that once their team became really good, and High took a lot of like control of the shot calling, I thought that's when they ended up like really, really shining, and they became just like a solid team. And yeah, when you're winning like that, all your players are going to be considered top at their role. That's just how the community works. So, yep.
When you were in Curse Academy in this period, people will forget because people get really quickly used to whatever the status quo is. Okay, so at the moment we all see this challenger system, and actually there's a bit of spotlight on it. Like, once the team gets to the final, you can watch it right after LCS, and you kind of know who the top teams are in each region for the challenger period. But back then, even though there were tournaments, I mean, most people I know didn't watch them, you know, or they'd only watch if they were a really hardcore fan, or if it was at an MLG and they were at the MLG anyway, you know. In general, though, people they'll watch LCS, but they're not necessarily going to watch a challenger tournament. So it's hard to, even if you're playing well, it's hard to have exposure. How good actually was Curse Academy? Like, I know you went through different players, and it was like it was a confusing period in terms of the tournament circuit in general. Like could you be confident just from your competitive play at the time? Like, okay, I'm in position still. If I get unbanned, I'll get right back into a team. Like, people are gonna know I'm good still.
Well, I definitely knew that I had team offers while I was playing amateur. Like, I had multiple teams come to me that said, you know, if we're still in LCS and you're unbanned, like, we'll put you on the team for season 4. So I had offers. So I knew that I would definitely end up in LCS. But I never really expected to qualify with Curse Academy because there was 2 different levels of Curse Academy. Like, online, I'd say Curse Academy was maybe like a top 4 or 5 team in NA. Like, we would consistently beat the bottom teams in LCS. Like, we would just be able to like roll over them in scrims. But when we played on LAN, we suffered from LAN jitters more than like any other team I've ever been on. Welter at the time like was not playing well on LAN yet. Something that he's been able to like overcome. He plays a lot better now on LAN. And Altec was extremely young. He was 15 years old. He had never played really on LAN multiple times, and it was just obvious that like pressure affected those guys a lot. I think part of it was that they were so young, and then I guess the other part of it was just plain inexperience. So yeah, I definitely don't think Curse Academy would have qualified for LCS or anything like that. But I knew at the time that I was playing well enough that if people actually watched our games, they could tell that I was like LCS caliber player. Like, I was like a level above the other junglers in the amateur scene.
If you think about the metas and the different champion pools that came in and out during season 3, what would have been, which would have been the best for Dominate? Like, would you have liked to do like the insect style, like carry jungling? Like, would you have liked to do the period where towards the end of season 3 it became like that Korean style, super low economy, low farm, like just ganks all the time? Which would you like, do you think?
The bruiser meta. Like, that was the best meta for me. Like, early season 3, I pretty much would have just been playing like the exact same as Saint. Like, we would have been playing the same exact champions, same exact style. That's just like the meta that I feel most comfortable in, which is kind of like early season 4 when I was playing like a bunch of Vi and like bruisers like that. That's just the meta that I'm just most comfortable in, just like farming a decent amount and then just making power plays. So yeah, I would have loved to play like Spring Split season 3. I think I would have been extremely strong back then.
Since you got to spend time around Saintvicious, like I said, at one point you were playing each other when you were in Dignitas, and then when you're in Curse Academy, you're in the Curse House, and obviously now you eventually replaced him. Explain something about Saint's personality to me, because there's one thing I've always thought was kind of strange, which is, on one hand, his personality seems to me a bit like part of the reason why some of his own teammates complain is because he can be really like full on. Like, it seems like there's times when he really wants to win, and so maybe he comes off as overbearing, then like too demanding. But then there's other times where it seems like if he loses or he just don't know how I can win in the situation, he goes the other way. He's like, he's just, oh, whatever, like, there's nothing we can do in that situation, like, whatever. Like, he goes between these two extremes, it seems like. On one hand, okay, people would say if he was in Curse and the results went down, oh, maybe he just didn't care as much then. But he's playing again now. He wants to try and play in this Curse Academy team now. So he's obviously trying to... There's something about him wants to compete. How do you explain his personality to an outsider who doesn't know him?
Yeah, Saint's definitely like hardcore. Like, he wants to win as much as like anyone. So he's not afraid to call people out on their mistakes. And sometimes he doesn't do it in like the best way. Sometimes it can be like a little bit more confrontational than people are used to. But... he doesn't actually mean harm, like when he's coming at someone. Like, he doesn't dislike someone as a person if he's like railing on them for a mistake or something. So a lot of people can't really break that, or a lot of people can't really adapt to those two extremes. It's really hard for them to be like, oh, this guy's still my friend, but he just like told me that like this was like a horrible play of mine, like, and like he must think I'm like a shit player, like a shit person or something. But it's not really like that. He just gets frustrated with like misplays and things like that, and he tries to correct them, I guess, in kind of like a confrontational way. So, yeah, I definitely think that like he's not as bad as like the community like sees him. He's not like this like asshole that you like can't be on a team with. But yeah, like for some players, like players that are more like emotional or like more I guess like soft, it doesn't really work well.
One of the things in the season 3 that was a really, really weird moment was everyone remembers when Vulcun became really good in the summer split. And the funny thing is, because the star of Vulcun was ManCloud, people will think, okay, that's the storyline. Like, ManCloud became really good. But from everyone I've talked to, it sounds like ManCloud was always ManCloud, and then really it's Xmithie that got really good. And when Xmithie got really good, because the mid-jungler synergy, suddenly ManCloud could shine and could, like, dominate the game, you know. And we saw when XDG came in Season 4, suddenly it went the other way, and it had the similar effect. ManCloud suddenly didn't look good, even though he was probably playing similarly. And Xmithie suddenly just, even when he went back to jungle, he was never the same player. What do you think? What was good about Xmithie when he was at his peak, and why do you think he couldn't, like, even when he switched back to playing jungle, why couldn't he become that good again, or why wasn't he effective anymore? Do you think?
Okay, so Xmithie was always really mechanically strong. Like, he had decent mechanics, but he always, like, didn't necessarily see the game in the most intelligent way. I guess he would, like, go for a lot of plays that were, like, really high risk, like, low reward. He was literally the opposite of Meteos in that type of, like, style. So when he was really good, it was because there was a bunch of these mechanical junglers. He was one of the only NA junglers that could actually play Lee Sin well. He could play Eve, and he could play these aggressive junglers, and he just knew where to be at the right times. He would make some mistakes, and they would end up dropping some games, but generally speaking, he would always be making, like, the aggressive, correct play. And I think that when he, like, switched back to jungle in Season 4, everyone had gotten smarter. There was a much higher level of junglers in the beginning of Season 4 than there was in Season 3. Just with all this, like, new talent coming in from overseas, and then just like as the NA scene's been growing, just every split you're just having better and better players. He wasn't able to just abuse people mechanically anymore, and since he hadn't been jungling as much recently, he didn't have as good of a I guess his jungle IQ went down a bit from where it was. So that's why he just wasn't able to get back to that point where he was just shitting on everyone, because he couldn't really, like, outthink most of the players, and he couldn't just brute force mechanically outskill them either. So he just ended up kind of looking mediocre.
In Season 4, when we were talking about your Dignitas period, and Voyboy was a top laner, and you had to have the synergy there. Well, now in Season 4, you've had Voyboy as your mid laner, and you've played him in that sense. Obviously, he gets a lot of criticism from the community, because people expect, listen, if you're going to be Voyboy, that name, and especially if you're going to switch position, they think, well, you better be really good then, because you could just be, you could still be a decent top laner. Realistically, evaluate, like, what has Voyboy been like as a mid laner? Like, what challenges has he had? Are there areas where we don't see? Is there subtleties to his game that we don't see?
So I think, like, Spring Split for Voy, he would play really well in scrims. Like, he's still playing well in scrims, and now I think at LCS he's playing extremely well too. But in Spring Split, he was just having, like, a lot of nerve issues that he didn't really have in the past, which kind of, like, onset randomly for him. So he would have, like, games where he just would kind of be out of it, or, like, he would be, like, sick, so he wouldn't be as focused on what he should be doing in the game. He'd be more focused on, like, all right, I'm on stage, like, let me try to, like, not throw up while we're playing this game. Which just, like, takes away from, like, your mentality. Like, you need to be, like, completely focused on everything you can possibly do positive. So I think that he's like a solid mid laner. We can still make a lot of the plays, and he's still aggressive. It's just Spring Split, there was, like, times, like, towards the beginning where he just, like, wasn't able to play at his peak potential, and just in general, like, our shot calling hasn't been that good. We make a lot of bad team decisions, so no one's gonna look good when you're just, like, losing games off team decisions, and you just end up, like, sitting in your base for, like, 20 minutes, like, trying to hold the Nexus. Like, that's never gonna be a situation where people are like, oh yeah, that player played really well. So yeah, I think that part of it is just our team, like, dynamic isn't the best. Like, we don't have the best I guess, like, shot calling, and it just makes us all look worse than we actually are.
What's weird is it's very rare. Like, when I described before that triple trade that happened, where, okay, there's a degree to which it kind of looked like Dignitas is the team that got screwed there, because, you know, like, a good player left this team, someone went there, and then you guys ended up with the person who was left over at the end. Usually, it's very unlikely that if you're on the other end of, like, a trade that's forced, that you kind of get, like, the best end of it. Usually the person who's giving up play, they're the one who's, like, got a reason, like, okay, I'm going to get someone way better in return. So when all of a sudden you wake up one day and they're like, oh yeah, Xpecial's just joining our team, that must have been, like, a bizarre scenario that you just, for free, you're just getting one of the best supports in the region. What did you think of that scenario?
I thought it was extremely weird. given where we were as a team, because I thought Bunny had been performing well. Like he had been a solid player. I thought he definitely like earned his spot. But at the same time, Xpecial just has all the experience and like the credentials to back it up. So like on paper, Xpecial is definitely definitely look like a better player than Bunny. But relatively speaking, I think that they're like kind of close in skill. So it was just kind of like a random factor. It's like, okay, so this could turn out really well, but there's just a lot of unknowns. And like personally, I thought it was like just a lot of like uncertainty that we just kind of took on for free, and it ended up like working out. I definitely think Xpecial's like been a good player for us and like helped us a lot, but it just seemed really random to me. I guess that's the best way to describe it.
So the joke of Curse in the past obviously was like they always finish fourth, like, you know, fourth in some sense. This season has been one where you can understand in the past why that could happen for Curse, because what would happen is there'd be a couple of teams like a Cloud9 or a TSM who always were on the top, but then once you got to the third, fourth, fifth spot, you know, it's quite variable there. Teams would just go up and down depending on which season it was or which split or who they just recruited. But you come to this season and it looks like the most competitive season ever. Like all these top teams where they can't even separate each other really. They keep getting deadlocked there. What have been the challenges for you in terms of the fact that Curse is like the team where at the moment you're the one who's been stuck in the sixth spot? Like you're looking at those five all battling each other, you're trying to just break into it, but you're just outside of it. Like what are the challenges of this season for Curse?
Yeah, it's definitely like the teams are a lot better, and I guess our biggest struggle is just like our mid to late game shot calling is just something that we haven't been able to really practice, like up to the point where we're making good decisions in game. Like the games that we win against C9, like CLG or like LMQ, are games where we've been able to just snowball off the early game, or we just have like a good comp advantage so we can kind of just like scale on them. But it's extremely hard to practice like mid to late game shot calling and scrims, because if you're winning a game mid to late game, the other team just forfeits in the scrim. Like they'll just be like, oh yeah, I'm sure you know how to take Baron and push, but like we don't actually know how to do that. We're not the best at just making the decision of like whether to pick people at Baron or finish the Baron or bait them or like any of those things. So I think that like it's been a really difficult season for us because we've been winning like the majority of our scrims all season. Like every single week we've been winning 75 to 80% of our scrims. And like even like Link went in an interview and just said it like last week. They ended up 2-0 at the end of the week, like with like a hard week, and we played like EG and Complexity. We won 80% of our scrims against CLG, and then we lose to EG and Complexity. And most people just attribute that to land jitters, but I don't actually think that's what it is. I think it's just that our decision making mid to late game is actually really poor, and we go through weeks where we'll win scrims in 15-20 minutes and we'll never get to that mid to late game. And then when you show up on LCS, everyone's playing a lot more passively. It's harder to get such big advantages going into mid to late game, and we'll just end up throwing massively. Like if you look at all the games that we've had advantages in and ended up losing, I think it's probably like more than any other team right now. So we're still like hopeful. We know that we can beat any team. Like we've beat every team in the LCS so far except for TSM, but yeah, we're still hopeful that we'll be able to like correct those issues, but it just feels like kind of random. Like going into a week, I don't know if we're gonna like 3-1 super week against LMQ, C9, and CLG, or we're gonna go like 0-2 to EG and Complexity. Like it doesn't really like there's no like direct correlation. It just feels like if we play a certain style, if we're able to get a big enough early game lead, we can win. And if we end up getting like in a stalled out mid to late game situation, we'll probably end up losing.
Is there I know you watch OGN sometimes. Is there a Korean player who like just something, so you just like something about him? Like he maybe has a similar style to you, or maybe some quality you don't have, and so that's what you admire. Is the one who really stands out for you, and this is your favorite to watch?
Are you talking about jungler or just player in general?
Jungler.
Jungler. Well, I think right now like Spirit's really good, but over like the last year, I've had just a lot of respect for Bengi. He plays that extremely low farm, high aggression style, which is something that I generally don't like to play. Like if my general most powerful style is when I'm able to like mix farming and ganking equally, so I can like farm to points where I'm stronger, make a power play, then like take an objective off that. But I really like Bengi's like high risk style. That's something that I've always kind of been like a more like low risk, high reward player, instead of as much like high impact plays just fighting for like absolutely no reason. That hasn't been something that I've been able to do. So I've always like respected Bengi a lot for being able to just have no fear, just trust his mechanics enough to just put himself in like such difficult situations just over and over again. So yeah, Bengi's definitely the player that like I admire the most.
So you made a tweet when I think it was when Amazing joined TSM. You made this tweet where you said something along the lines of like, like now there's only like 2 NA junglers, and I mean, someone even said technically, if you say Crumbzz is from Venezuela, there's 1 NA jungler. It's IWillDominate. So actually, in your
Meteos.
region, there's 2. Yeah.
Meteos and me, yeah.
So there's two. There's 2 guys, okay, from NA who in the NA region are junglers and LCS. Mm-hmm. In general, as a general point, what were you saying about this? And as another point, is this like an issue? Because, for example, say some good jungler out there does exist who's from NA. Like, for example, say Xmithie got good again, or say there was some challenger guy who was good. It looks kind of now like there probably isn't any space for them on any team. And then even if there was a space, maybe someone would just recruit another talent from another region because NA has the money and the exposure. What do you think on this topic in general?
Yeah, I generally just think that it's not a really good representation of our region. Like, it's obviously good to make NA more competitive, like on a global like scale, I guess. If you have LMQ going to Worlds and they end up doing well, it's like great. Like a team from NA got like top 4, but just generally speaking, like I wish it was more of like a representation of NA, and I wish that like NA was able to like grow to the point where we would have good enough players that we didn't need to keep on recruiting from like overseas. But that being said, I like most of the European players like came over and stuff. So I mean, I'm like friendly with all of them now, but it's just like as an NA jungler, I wish that like our region was represented more by NA players than like I guess like Korean, Chinese, European players. Yeah, more like Olympic style or something. Because like when you watch the Olympics, you watch like USA and you're like, oh, like all right, so USA is doing well. You can have like pride for your country. Like if a team like LMQ wins Worlds, like I'm happy for them because they're my friends, but I don't feel like any like I don't feel like my country won. I feel like a Chinese team won Worlds. That's how I'd feel, and I'd be like, oh, it's cool because like I know these players, but I don't actually feel like my region is good. Like I don't feel like NA is good. I feel like NA is still weak, and we have like good teams here from different places. So like even if they expand the team to like 10. Even if they expand the league to 10 teams, like who would be joining the league? Like maybe Coast. Well, Coast has a European jungler too. They have Santorin. So like I kind of feel bad for like the players that I've known in solo queue, just the up and coming junglers that like have talent that want to break into the scene, because it honestly feels like there's like no space. Like they'll like never be able to get there. And I guess for me, because I'm kind of like on the back end of my career and like I've been playing for so long, like it doesn't really matter because I've got to like play in the scene. But just for like somebody who's up and coming who wants to get there, like maybe like a 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid, it just feels like they'll never end up playing LCS and they'll never have these experiences. So, yeah.
A year prior to now, you still couldn't play in the competitive scene. You've had a split and a half, well, a bit more than half, but approaching 2 splits worth of play now.
Yep.
If we thought a year into the future, like what would your expectation be of what could have happened in a year? What's like realistic, do you think, for you and for Curse?
It really depends. Like I don't really know, because I assume that there's going to be changes. This is the way Curse has always worked, is if there is a split where they're not performing, or even if there's a split where people are performing, unless we're like actually going to Worlds and we're top 3, like players are just going to get replaced. Like it could be me, it could be anyone else on the team. Players are just going to end up replaced, because the whole goal is to find the right mix of players that's going to make this team top 3. So I really don't have many expectations. I think if they get lucky and they like replace like some of our players, and then the team suddenly has different strengths and like the shot calling is somehow improved, I think Curse could be a really strong team. I think mechanically all of our players are like fine. I just think that we don't have the best global like understanding of the game. So if we work on that, if we continue to work, I could see us eventually being strong. Like I could see us being top 3. We can beat all these teams mechanically. But yeah, realistically, I don't know what's going to happen. Like I don't even know if I'm going to have a job in like 3 weeks. So it's hard for me to make like assumptions like that, or make statements like, yeah, like summer of like 2015 we're going to Worlds, because yeah, I don't really know. Could still be like a 6th place team. It could suddenly be a 4th place team again. Could end up being like a top team. I think it's really, really random with Curse more than any other team because there is so much there's so much change that goes down like in between splits.
Okay, for my hypothetical question, so that we can represent North America and show like how good the North American region has and can be, what I want you to do is create for me an NA super team from all of history, and you're just gonna because you played since like season 2, okay? You're just gonna show me who the best player at every position is, but at their peak, you know. So it can be someone from season 1 at the top if you want it. It can be someone from season 2 at jungle. Like it's up to you who they would be. But this is we're just trying to make the ultimate dream team of like amazing players from NA. Who would be on it?
I'm assuming I shouldn't include myself in it, right?
It's up to you. It depends how bold you are, you know.
Okay. Well, I think I'm confident enough to include myself in it. So I'd say Reggie mid from season 2.
He was just the best
the shot
at the time.
Yeah, but I think his intangibles are more
okay.
more important.
What do you
like
think of there?
Okay, so he was like good at LAN. He could always perform better at LAN than he could normally. He was actually a clutch player. So like even if you saw like the Zubu Frost games, like he pretty much outlaned Rapid Star in season 2 World Championships. Even though Rapid Star is probably a better mechanical player, he shows up to play, and I would count on him to like make good decisions in the game. So I'd say you've got season 2 Reginald. You have early season 2 Voyboy, so like Dignitas, Lee Sin, Voyboy. You got me jungling late season 2, like let's say winter of season 2, early season 3. It's like Bruiser meta, Rengar Hecarim, Xin Zhao, like that type of style. And then you have season 2, late season 2, Choster and Doublelift. And I've kind of gone with a lot of season 2 here, just because that's when I thought that NA was probably most competitive compared to like overseas. And that's when like the players were at their peak. So yeah, I'd say Choster and Doublelift bot lane, season 2, Reggie mid, season 2, early season 3 Voy, and then me, winter, season 2.
Okay. To wrap things up, do you have a final message, someone you want to thank or say hello to?
Definitely like thanks to everyone who's been supporting me like all this time, like through the ban and everything else. So definitely shout out to all of our sponsors, Zubu, Cooler Master, Astro, Energems, Alienware, and Team Curse.